I watched in horror as Karen Mitchell grabbed my sister Margaret's wheelchair and accidentally sent it tumbling down our front steps. "Well, that was unfortunate," she said, brushing off her hands with zero remorse. She had no idea who I really was. It had started that morning when I was helping Margaret get ready for physical therapy. Since her accident during her final deployment as an Army nurse 6 months ago, I converted my office into her bedroom and built a temporary wooden ramp for her wheelchair. The ramp that was now Karen Mitchell's latest obsession. I'm Robert Thompson, a 65-year-old retired Army colonel who now works as an attorney specializing in veterans' rights cases. My sister Margaret, 70, had served honorably for 30 years before a field hospital collapse in Afghanistan left her partially paralyzed. After her medical discharge, she moved in with me, her only remaining family. I'd lived in Oakwood Estates for 8 years before Margaret moved in. Our HOA was always strict, but things got dramatically worse when Karen was elected president 3 months ago. At first, it was petty violations, grass too tall by half an inch, trash cans left out 10 minutes too long. But lately, she become fixated on my unauthorized exterior modifications. "That wheelchair ramp is an eyesore," she declared at last week's meeting, her manicured nails tapping impatiently. "It diminishes our property values and must be removed immediately. No exceptions." I tried explaining that it was a temporary solution until the permanent ramp was installed next month. I'd shown her the approved building permits, the contractor's timeline, even the doctor's notes explaining Margaret's need for accessibility. But Karen wasn't interested in reason. "Rules are rules," she said with that fake sympathetic smile that never reached her eyes. "Perhaps if your sister's condition is so severe, she should consider a more appropriate living arrangement." I'd barely contained my anger then, reminded myself that Margaret needed me calm and focused. This morning, as I helped Margaret down our ramp and into my car, I spotted Karen power walking toward us, clipboard in hand, 2 HOA board members trailing behind her like obedient puppies. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're conducting an emergency inspection of your unapproved structure." I sighed, checking my watch. "Margaret has a doctor's appointment. This will have to wait." Karen stepped directly in front of my car. "This won't take long. The board has voted to take immediate action on violations that impact our community aesthetics." The way she said community aesthetics made it sound like my sister's disability was personally offending her. "I've already explained that we have permits." "Those permits were issued by the city," Karen interrupted, "not approved by the HOA Architectural Review Committee." She held up a document. "This is a removal notice. You have 24 hours to dismantle this unapproved structure or face daily fines of $200. Margaret touched my arm gently. "Robert, we're going to be late." I nodded, trying to stay calm. My military training had taught me to choose my battles wisely. "We'll discuss this when I return, Karen." Her smile turned cold. "There's nothing to discuss. The ramp comes down or the fines begin. Perhaps this will teach you to follow proper procedures in the future." As I backed out of the driveway, I watched Karen taking photos of our ramp, measuring its dimensions with a tape measure. Something about her smug satisfaction made my stomach turn. It reminded me of petty officers who abuse their authority, something I'd never tolerated in my command. Margaret noticed my white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel. "Don't let her get to you, little brother. We face worse than suburban tyrants." I smiled at my sister's resilience. After 3 decades of military service and 6 months of grueling physical therapy, Karen Mitchell was hardly the toughest obstacle Margaret had overcome. The doctor's appointment took longer than expected. Margaret's recovery was progressing well, but slowly. By the time we returned home 3 hours later, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A group of men were dismantling our ramp, tossing the wooden planks into a pile on our lawn. Karen stood supervising, a triumphant smile on her face. I slammed on the brakes and jumped out of the car. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen's smile never wavered. "Enforcing HOA regulations, as is my right as board president. You were given notice." "I was given 24 hours. The board determined this violation required immediate action," she replied coolly. "Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our bylaws allows for immediate removal of unapproved structures that significantly impact community aesthetics. I was furious, but focused on the immediate problem. You've removed our ramp. How exactly is my sister supposed to enter our home? Karen shrugged. That's not the HOA's concern. You should have thought of that before installing an unapproved structure. Margaret was still sitting in the car, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. Several neighbors had gathered to witness the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. I noticed Frank Davis, a fellow veteran who lived 2 doors down, watching with a deep frown. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me a subtle nod before pulling out his phone and beginning to record. I need to get my sister inside, I said through gritted teeth. Then I'll deal with this. Karen glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch. My work here is done anyway. Consider this a lesson in following proper HOA protocols. As she turned to leave, I helped Margaret into her wheelchair, then realized our predicament. With no ramp, the only way into the house was up 6 concrete steps. Karen, I called out, you can't leave us like this. How is Margaret supposed to get inside? Karen turned back, sighing dramatically as if we were imposing on her. I suppose we could help this once, as a courtesy. She gestured to the 2 men who had finished dismantling our ramp. Assist them, please. I recognized one of the workers as the son of our neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. He looked deeply uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes as he approached. Sir, I'm really sorry about this, he whispered. Mom's going to be furious when she finds out. What happened next still makes my blood boil when I think about it. Instead of carefully helping Margaret up the stairs, Karen became impatient with their slow progress. This is taking too long, she snapped, pushing past them to grab the handles of Margaret's wheelchair herself. Just lift it up the steps. It's not that complicated. Margaret gripped her armrests, looking terrified. Please be careful, she whispered. Karen ignored her, attempting to tilt the wheelchair back to navigate the first step. She clearly had no idea how to properly handle a wheelchair. I moved forward to intervene, but before I could reach them, Karen lost her grip. The wheelchair lurched sideways, then backward. Time seemed to slow down as I watched my sister's wheelchair slip from Karen's grasp and tumble down the 3 steps they'd managed to climb. Margaret cried out as she fell, the wheelchair landing hard on its side at the bottom of the stairs. I rushed to her, heart pounding. Margaret, are you okay? She was shaken, tears streaming down her face, clutching her arm that had been pinned beneath the wheelchair. The sight of my strong sister, a woman who had treated wounded soldiers under enemy fire, reduced the tears in our own driveway, ignited something primal in me. Karen stood at the top of the steps, looking annoyed rather than concerned. Well, that was unfortunate, she said, as if she'd spilled coffee rather than endangered someone's life. This is exactly why unapproved mobility devices are a liability issue. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You just pushed my sister down the stairs, and you're worried about liability? I helped Margaret back into her wheelchair, checking her for injuries. Her arm was already bruising, and she winced when I touched it. I think we need to go back to the hospital, I told her quietly. Karen was already backing away. I didn't push anyone. She fell because that wheelchair isn't suitable for stairs, which proves my point about the need for proper accommodations approved by the HOA. The audacity of her statement left me speechless. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, had witnessed everything and rushed over to help. I saw what happened, she whispered to me. That was deliberate negligence, if not worse. I nodded, focusing on Margaret for now. Can you help me get her back into the car? She needs medical attention. Once Margaret was safely in the car, I turned to Karen, who was already walking away with her HOA minions. This isn't over, I called after her. She turned, that smug smile still firmly in place. Actually, it is. And if you attempt to reinstall that RAM without proper approval, the fines will double. As I drove Margaret to the emergency room, my mind was racing. 4 or 5 years since my retirement from the Army, I'd kept my professional life separate from my neighborhood. None of my neighbors knew about my legal career specializing in veterans' rights and discrimination cases. I'd wanted a peaceful home life separate from my high-pressure career. But Karen had just crossed a line, that couldn't be uncrossed. The ER doctor confirmed that Margaret had a sprained wrist and bruised ribs from the fall. She's lucky, he told me. Falls from wheelchairs can cause serious injuries, especially for someone with her pre-existing condition. Margaret squeezed my hand as they wrapped her wrist. "It's not your fault," she whispered, seeing the anger and guilt on my face. "You couldn't have known she would do something so reckless. But I should have been prepared. I should have anticipated how far Karen would go to enforce her petty rules." The doctor asked how the accident happened, and when I explained, his face darkened. "That sounds like a potential ADA violation, not to mention assault and negligence. Have you considered legal action?" I nodded slowly. "I'm considering all options." Margaret looked at me with knowing eyes. "It's time, Robert. Stop hiding who you are." On the drive home, I made a decision. It was time to stop hiding who I was. When we arrived back at our house, several neighbors had gathered, having heard about the incident. Without a word, 4 of them, including Frank Davis and another veteran from down the street, carefully carried Margaret in her wheelchair up the steps and into our home. Mrs. Rodriguez handed me a casserole. "For dinner," she said, "and I have security cameras on my porch that captured everything. The footage is yours if you need it." I thanked her, touched by the support. Once Margaret was settled, I went into my home office and made a phone call I'd been avoiding. "Thompson Legal. Answer my assistant, Lisa." "Lisa, it's Robert. I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow and prepare some documents for me. I'm dealing with an emergency situation that requires my attention." After giving her specific instructions, I hung up and began preparing for tomorrow. I pulled out my old dress uniform from the closet, running my fingers over the ribbons and medals that represented 30 years of service. I hadn't worn it since Margaret's homecoming ceremony, but tomorrow called for a visual reminder of who we were and what we stood for. Karen thought she knew who I was, just another homeowner she could bully and intimidate. She had no idea she just assaulted the sister of a decorated Army colonel and one of the most successful veterans' rights attorneys in the state. The next morning, I attended the emergency HOA meeting Karen had called to discuss my aggressive and threatening behavior from the day before. Margaret insisted on coming with me, arm in a sling. I wore my full dress uniform, medals and all. We arrived at the community center to find the room packed. Karen sat at the front table, looking pleased with the turnout. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw Margaret, but completely disappeared when she noticed my uniform. She quickly recovered, though, banging her gavel with unnecessary force. "Let's call this meeting to order," she announced. "We're here to discuss the Thompson property violations and the owner's subsequent threatening behavior toward board members." Karen spent 15 minutes detailing my supposed violations, from the unsightly ram to my aggressive tone. She showed photos of our home, pointing out each perceived flaw with obvious relish. Furthermore, Mr. Thompson has repeatedly refused to comply with HOA directives and has threatened retaliatory action against this board for simply doing its job. She looked around for support. Does the homeowner wish to respond? I stood slowly, straightening my tie. Before I respond to these allegations, I'd like to introduce some relevant context that Mrs. Mitchell has omitted. I gestured to Mrs. Rodriguez, who connected her phone to projector. The room fell silent as crystal clear footage played showing Karen grabbing Margaret's wheelchair, struggling with it, then losing control and sending my sister tumbling down the steps. Gasps filled the room. Karen jumped to her feet. This video is taken out of context. I was trying to help. The context, I replied calmly, is that you illegally removed an ADA-compliant temporary ramp from our home, leaving my disabled sister with no way to enter. Then you recklessly attempted to move her wheelchair, resulting in injuries that required emergency medical treatment. I turned to address the room. For those who don't know me well, I've lived quietly in this community for 8 years. I value my privacy, which is why most of you don't know what I do for a living. I paused, making eye contact with Karen. I am Colonel Robert Thompson, retired after 30 years of Army service. More relevantly, I am the founding partner of Thompson Legal, specializing in veterans' rights, ADA compliance, and discrimination cases. The color drained from Karen's face, as whispers erupted around the room. Yesterday's actions constitute multiple violations of federal law, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and potentially assault and battery laws. I continued. My sister, Major Margaret Thompson, served this country honorably for 30 years as an Army nurse before being injured in Afghanistan. The treatment she received yesterday is not only illegal, it's a disgrace to our community. The board immediately voted to reinstate our temporary ramp and issue a formal apology. Karen resigned that same day, citing personal reasons. The full weight of my professional connections came crashing down on her within days. Investigators arrived at her perfectly manicured home with a warrant. Her smug confidence shattered completely when they started asking questions about HOA finances. It turned out that our wheelchair ramp wasn't the only thing Karen had been concerned with. Investigators uncovered years of financial irregularities in the HOA accounts. Karen had been funneling thousands of dollars into personal accounts disguised as administrative expenses. The court handed down a comprehensive sentence: 2 years in prison for financial fraud, major fines for ADA violations, and a permanent injunction preventing Karen from ever serving on any HOA again. Our community transformed. The new board created an accessibility fund with the recovered money, ensuring that all residents could safely access their homes regardless of physical limitations. They also established a Veterans Advisory Committee to ensure that the needs of our community's many former service members were properly addressed. Margaret's recovery strengthened through community support. The neighbors who had once stood by silently now regularly checked in on her, offering rides to physical therapy or simply stopping by for coffee and conversation. 6 months later, I received a letter from Karen. "I never understood the damage I was causing," she wrote. "Rules without compassion aren't justice. They're just cruelty." As Margaret said while we sat on our new, permanent ramp watching the sunset, Karen thought she was pushing me down those stairs, but she was really just setting herself up for the biggest fall of all. Justice wasn't just served. It transformed our community. Sometimes it takes someone standing up to make others realize they shouldn't stay seated in the face of injustice. What do you think about how our society treats disabled veterans? Have you ever stood up against unfair treatment? Share your thoughts in the comments and show some respect for those who served.